Mí mágad caithearlaí I dús bar bhhaachtam a bhuíchas a gháil leis an teachta cín ó Callahan a sucht an deis a thuirteam a bheith páirteach raibh ma am ach tá mé ag brath bus beag an níos déanaí. Thank you very much to the Social Democrats for facilitating me. I'll start by thanking the Library and Research Service for their digest, as usual, produced under pressure, and I thank them for that. I stand here as someone who proudly campaigned against water charges and campaigned to keep water services within the local authority. It appalled me what we were doing, and I watched it as I was an active member, underfund and under-resource and undermine the local authority. We did it on every level. We did it on waste management. I would make unions stood by and watched it happening at the time. I used Galway. It was the second last local authority to succumb, and we had the best, theoretically, Minister, and there were always room for improvement and questions as to where our refuse was actually going, but we had theoretically the best system in the country back in 2000, 22 years ago. Led by the people on the ground. There was a book published on it, Waste is a Burning Issue. And they led us in relation to zero waste, and led a campaign where there were monster meetings in a hotel that was proudly owned by the state at one stage, the Great Southern, and that's a story in itself. And what happened? A fantastic service, 3 bins, education liaison officers going out, taken away, and legislation passed to remove the power for local authorities to pass their own waste management plan. And parallel with that then, we had the water debacle, and I proudly stood, and I have to say I was led by the people on the ground, and proudly so, and I think it was a very bad decision to take the water services from the local authority. They were the experts on the ground. I had no difficulty with a national body, but trust was missing from that, and we were proven right in relation to it. The memory, the institutional memory, the experience on the ground from those people that knew about where pipes were, where leaks were. And we knew at a very early stage that approximately 40% of the water was wasted on the ground. That wasn't the workers' fault. That wasn't the people out there doing their job who responded like that when we phoned them in relation to leaks and difficulties, and they were out. The problem was the governments successfully, with the help of the managers in the counties and the cities, undermined completely and set the scene for the privatisation of the water system. If this is a step to undo that, I very much welcome it. But I've grown very, very cynical. I wish I wasn't. I wish I had more optimism. And it's my duty to have optimism, actually, and to lead, but it's difficult. So in that limited sense, I welcome this, that we're going somewhere to confirm that this will be a publicly owned utility. However, I've a problem with the word company and shares, and I'm not quite sure why that is necessary, and I think there's a danger that it could be still sold off in the future. So we clearly need a referendum, and it's a matter of disappointment to me that we're now discussing this in a vacuum. And I would hope, before it goes any further through its committee stage, that we would have a firm commitment and wording from the government in relation to when we're going to have the referendum, the wording of that, because we don't want weasel words. We've had enough of weasel words. We want a firm commitment. I could read out the words that the unions have suggested. I'm not going to, but there's any amount of examples that we clearly enshrine that this is owned by the people, for the people, because it is the most vital thing that we'll talk about, along with housing and health. But water is top of the list, and we've seen what happened in other countries. And indeed, Deputy O'Callaghan has referred to various examples. I saw that in Canada myself, in Toronto, where everything was privatised, the refuse, and gradually they had to change that because the private system simply doesn't work. It's based on profit and greed. Profit and greed, and we've seen that earlier on in the week. We've seen it query the allegations in relation to Borplanola, and we've seen it in the 1,500-page SiteServe report, which I'm making my way through, and it's horrific. So the private system is there for profit. Absolutely a role for the markets, absolutely a role for the private system, but matched by a state that recognises what's fundamental to a civilised society. Water, publicly owned, it should never even be up for discussion. Public housing, across the board, public housing to balance the market, and public health and public education and a public childcare. So if this is a step in that direction, and I'm really not sure that it is, I welcome it. I welcome the accountability under the Public Accounts Committee, but I would like, Minister, if you could explain, and I should know myself, having spent a good few years on the public accounts, I'm not sure why you're distinguishing between accounting officer and accounting person. Was that a view to bring more accountability? I'm not sure. I even with my own experience, I can't make that one out. As has already been said, there were only 3 recommendations from the Housing Committee. I don't sit on that. I thank them for their work, but they did make very specific recommendations. One of only was taken on board, and that was in relation to the public accounts. Now, from my reading of the committee, it was the committee that asked for the distinction between accounting person and accounting officer, but I'm not quite sure why that was. Then there was a regulatory impact analysis carried out, and they came up with 3 options. And I never really understand when they do this, that one of the options is do nothing, because clearly there's something, you know, I think they should be looking at the options, but there's always in this no intervention, as if that's an option. But so there are 2, separate Irish Water from Seirbhísí with additional regulatory requirements, or number 3, separated with no additional regulatory. And obviously they went for number 2, and the additional regulatory requirements presumably is the public accounts, and is it the regulator as well. Again, I'm a little worried about that, because that's for commercial companies. I'm not sure what status this company is going to have. So if that could be clarified either tonight or in the process. And then we have the practical, the Curran Fáilte gur bisce éirden an tanam a bhés an agriach seo. Ach tá mé beag an imbúra I gcónaí bín an teidil ghaeilge bín sé mar rud dúilteach tá agla orm gur rud dúilteach é isce éirden agus níl mé chur lucht ar bith ar na haibria. I'm worried that Irish is often used in a negative sense. So I'm delighted that it's isce éirden. I'm delighted with that. But very often it's associated with negativity. And that's a little difficulty for me. I think of Law Nua, which is in relation to a mental health centre in Galway. And it's anything but a Law Nua in terms of the way the government has treated. I think of Tusla, which was, I think I was going to say, I better not use the word, but Tus is beginning and law is day. And so the beginning of a new day, the grammar is wrong and the Sinn Féin is gone, and it's nonsense. And of course Tusla itself has had its own problems, and perhaps that has come from the word, you know, the beginning of a new day, which be Tusla or Tusanle Nua, becomes Tusla. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Again, no reflection on the staff. But there's an absence of vision here, and we stick in the Irish language rather than the Irish language being part of the solution. And again, I've repeatedly pointed out to a book called The Irish Languages and Ecology by Cronin. It's a wonderful little book, tiny little book. It's in Irish and English, and it talks about Irish being part of the solution with climate change because of the history of the Irish language and the Irish people being with nature and working with nature. So that's just an aside. When I have the time, courtesy of Social Democrats, I've decided to use it, but I despair of the negativity of the word. I hope that Uisce Éirden works out. I have a little difficulty with the way they have been allowed to develop unaccountably. And they're pushed on all sides, from every side. I do believe it makes sense to have them in the local authority under the new thing that you're now doing, but with the footprint, as has been said, in the local authority. That's where they should be, along with their colleagues in the other services. Moving them out doesn't make sense to me. Finally, I'll finish up on just practical matters in Galway City. I've mentioned this before to you, Minister. I think the problem is partly mine that I haven't come back to you in relation to Carrow. And raw sewage is pumping out into Carrow, into the seas as we speak. There's been a long campaign, even before I became a TD, and I think back before I became a councillor, to erect the suitable infrastructure. Irish Water has a plan to build there. My personal belief, and a lot of other people, it's totally the wrong site. And to complicate matters even more, the people that own that have planning permission for a heritage centre, and as I understand it, they're proceeding to erect a heritage centre in Cave on Trochon, just outside Carrow. and I've mentioned this before, I raised it as a topical issue for the Irish water to see sense. There are other sites. I'm in trouble for mentioning Rossaville, but I'll mention it again, Údaráis, and it's an industrial site, and Údaráis have Údaráis na Gaeltachta, tá talamh acu an sin, and to me it's a perfect site, but I'm no expert. But the site that they're putting it on is just, it's not going anywhere. And that's Uisce Éireann pursuing that. To me, that's tunnel vision. Now, they're clearly under pressure to perform, but they're not performing. But then we had Inishboffin, the latest story from Inishboffin. They're not allowed to drink their water. And Irish Water, again, 3 weeks late in telling the people. So people were drinking water that wasn't fit for purpose. Earlier this morning, we had a discussion in questions and answers on a policy for the islands. Here's another example of drinking water. And all the other TDs have similar examples from all over the country. But it's inexcusable not to tell the people that there's something wrong with the water till 3 weeks later. I've been through that with Cryptosporidium in Galway, where there was a risk assessment way back in 2005 or 7. We were never told about Cryptosporidium, but the officials at management level knew it. I thought we had left that day behind. So we've two problems here, the fact that they can't drink their water and the fact that they haven't been told about it. And then just in relation to the Aran Islands again, just to show you how we go round in circles, there were two problems. One was a county council and a toilet, and the sewage going into, how will I describe this? Going into a field, the county council, and a separate problem with a number of cottages. I can't tell you how many contacts, and other TDs as well, have had with the EPA, the county council and Irish Water, going around in circles trying to identify who is going to take charge, who's going to do something. I'm talking about years and a file that big. That's the difficulty with no clear roles and no clear vision and no clear target set. I'll finish by saying Galway is one of the 5 cities identified to grow. We have Mutton Island treatment plant, which should never have gone there. It should have gone the docks, but it did go there. And I'm not sure, although management tell us, to be fair to them, that it's fit for purpose, that it's able to cope. I believe it's not, because on many of the occasion we have raw sewage going into the bay from the outfalls because of rain events, which are supposed to be rare, but they're every single day in Galway. Finally, the east of Galway, or Galway City East, on that side, we do not have the infrastructure for the development that's planned. So,